Welcome to the video series, The Art of Validation. Now, in this first video, we're going to address the idea of filling in the gap that most relationships allow to remain void. This gap, of course, is validation. Most couples that I work with struggle with a validation gap in their relationship. It's actually quite easy to create one. If you're interested, here are several things that you can do to create a validation gap. First of all, give off the signal in a conversation that you do not have time and you want to get as quickly as possible through this. Secondly, listen and act like you care and then have no action or follow through to what was said. Also, tell your spouse, especially during a dispute, how they think and how they should feel. I mean, all these are examples of invalidation. But validation is a lot more than just letting someone know you understand how they feel. The need for validation comes on the heels of several mistakes we all make in the early years of marriage. Let me share some of them with you. The first one, assume you're always right. To achieve validation, you must believe that your spouse has something of value to add to the discussion. When two people assume each has something of value to add, validation actually comes quite naturally. Here's another mistake. Listen with the goal of victory instead of understanding. Now keep in mind that in marriage, victory must be shared or else someone is deemed the loser. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be married to a loser. So don't try to create one with a victory mindset. One last mistake. Allow a disagreement to escalate by careless choice of words. Hurtful you statements or invalidating comments can lead to an eventual validation gap where conversations are avoided altogether with anything more complex than what's for dinner. Some examples here. There you go again. You never listen. You're not making any sense. Again, if you've been married for even just a few years, you've probably made some of these mistakes. And if they continue, you end up with a validation gap and a lot of emotional distance. Let me give one more mistake here for kicks and giggles. Assume the quickest way out is up. In other words, sometimes it may be tempting to turn up the temperature, pick a fight, and everyone just kind of takes their corners. Though things may have ended badly, at least it ended. There's actually a better way. But before we take a look at some validation solutions, let's take a look at why we're afraid to validate. And there are at least 3 reasons why people are afraid to validate and to close that gap. Reason number 1, lack of trust. The lack of trust stems from a handful of fears. Fears you don't care about my position or the value I bring to the conversation. The fears that I will feed your ego and make you into a monster. The fear that you'll just take advantage of my vulnerabilities. The fear that I'll always have to go first and you'll let me take all the blame. Now it's vital to not only declare these fears, you have to discuss them rather than allow them to grow in silence. All right, reason number 2, lack of practice. Actually, the best time to validate is when you are not in disagreement. Validate your spouse in the silly stuff that doesn't need to be an argument. I see couples do this all the time. They get into disputes over things that they just don't matter. I mean, let me give you some examples. The interstate number that we took to get to our last vacation. Where we had lunch last week on our date. What your spouse called you in your last argument. Oh, here's one. What your sister said about you in the reunion that still upsets you. I mean, why escalate a conversation over something so trivial? Why not use that as a way to validate and save your energy for conversations that actually matter? Here's some ways to validate using the examples that I just shared. Yeah, that interstate route was a better route. You know, I really enjoyed that lunch with you last week, wherever it was we ate. Your sister can say some very hurtful things. I shouldn't have called you that or anything like that. I'm sorry. If you reserve validating comments for arguments, you won't get much practice. And the more practice in the little things, the more credibility you'll have in actual disagreements or conflict. By the way, if you're interested in going a little bit deeper here with conflict, I have another video series called Fair Fighting, and it really goes into that discussion. So let's keep in mind that the more you practice validation, the more you go from a either or to a both and mindset where you both have something of value to add in the conversation. But you have to actually believe this is true. All right, so lack of practice, that's a big reason that people don't validate. Third reason, lack of patience. Just like any other new skills, you have to keep in mind that results may take a while. I mean, you may have tried to validate your spouse, but it backfires, so you quit. Perhaps your spouse accused you of not being genuine. Your efforts may have felt awkward or phony, and you ended up in an argument anyway. You may have even tried to validate for a little while, and then you gave up too soon. And I'm here to tell you, validation does produce results, but you cannot try it like a new brand of coffee and then go right back to what you were doing. It has to be the way you communicate. All right, one more thought on the lack of results here. You may have tried, but then you had the wrong goal. Validation is not a strategy. It's not a way to get out of an argument, stay out of a conflict. It's not a way to trick your partner. It's not a strategy. It's not a way to make them think that that they're always right. You may have a poor relationship with conflict, and so you seek to avoid it altogether. Listen, validation can be used to avoid conflict, but that is not the goal. This is very important. The main goal of validation is to create a fair field of discussion that flows naturally from the shared belief that you both have something of value to add to the discussion, even if you disagree. I'd like to share some validation principles with you in the next video, but before we end this one, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about why I believe validation is more of an art and should not be treated like a strategy or a technique. Validation is more like an art because done correctly, you start with a blank canvas. I once had the privilege of watching a professional artist take a blank canvas and paint this incredible work of art. Every brush stroke, every paint drip was purposeful. It was valuable. It was given the freedom to lead the painter into a journey of beauty. And I asked him why he didn't catch the drips, why he didn't clean them up as he went. You know what he said? He said, "I don't pass judgment on that which helps bring the artwork to completion, even if I don't see its place yet." Validation must be given a blank slate. That means that the past is not given permission to override a truthful moment in the present. If your partner is hurting, validate that truth. If your partner is trying to listen, validate that truth. If your partner is showing some improvements, validate that truth. If your partner is giving you valuable feedback, recounting some historical accuracy, being vulnerable, what? Validate those truths. I mean, there's no end to what you can do if you validate and you begin with a blank canvas. You practice on a regular, intentional effort. True validation starts with a conversation with a spirit of forgiveness, not resentment. I mean, resentment, if that's your issue, that's not your partner's issue. You probably should seek some help for that and begin to have more honest conversations with your partner that allows for a blank slate. All right, one last thing here. Validation is an art because effectively you draw the attention of your partner in a good way. I had an artist friend in high school. He showed me a painting that he had done. He says, "I want you to tell me how it affects you." And I said, "Well, okay, that's interesting. It's a painting of an island. It's at the edge of the sea, but it was kind of rounded on the edge of the island." And I told him, I wondered what was around the corner. And he said, "Aha, that's the assignment." I went, "What does that mean?" He says, "Well, the assignment was to create a piece of art that draws people in and it makes them wonder about what they can't see." It worked. Validation done effectively draws the attention of your partner and it makes them want to talk to you. Let me remind you, the most effective use of validation is when you're not in an argument, when people's defenses are down, when they don't see you coming with an agenda, and when you have the greatest opportunity to make small deposits in your emotional tank of your spouse. One last way validation is an art. Done consistently, you keep getting better and you establish your own style. If you study the great artists, you'll discover not only how, but why their artistic style changed. Sometimes wartime impacted the great artists. Linking up with different art dealers, friends, romantic interests, these things cause an artist's style to change. As you practice the artistic expression of validation, you will see your style evolve. And the more you intentionally practice validation when you're not in conflict, the more naturally it will flow when you are. As your partner becomes more accustomed to your style of validation, they will be less critical of your efforts during conflicts. Truly, validation is one of those, I think, unsung heroes of effective communication. And essentially, if you're regularly practicing the art of validation, you're saying to your partner, you're not crazy. What you have to say is valuable and important to me. You can be vulnerable with me, and I will not take advantage of you. Eventually, your efforts will be validated. Yes, your validations will be validated, and your partner will begin to copy or at least begin to reciprocate your efforts. But someone has to take the initiative. Will it be you? Okay, let's conclude this video. In the next one, we're going to look at 3 validation principles to help motivate you to turn your validation into your own personal art form. I'd like for you to take a few minutes after this video, highlight the areas that are new or that you think might be useful, and use that as a starting place. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.